What's happening, party people? Welcome to Punchboard Party. My name is Daniel and this is Hot Take, where I take a look at 5 trending games on Board Game Geek. Today's list, we have some new hotness and we also have some hotness that I've been hanging around for a long time to talk about, so let's get right to it. Number 1 on the hotness today on Board Game Geek is a game called Wild Assent. This is a tactical, grid-based movement skirmish game that has been coming to backers over the last couple months and also has a new expansion that can be found on GameFound. So for me, this game looks really neat, but I have to say that the outside of the board looks a lot more interesting than the core mechanism of this game. This grid-based tactical skirmish style game just gives me bad feelings from when I first tried to get into HeroClix when I was in high school. I found the grid-based battle system just too restrictive and really took the wind out of my sails. And so since then, I don't really give grid-based movement tactical systems a fair shot. So in Wild Assent, the theme is that you're these seekers or hunters going after these kind of wild mythical beasts out in the wilderness. The main kind of mode is a cooperative mode that you go out and you fight these monsters and bring back wild game to your encampment. And so there's kind of like action selection or worker placement happening on your encampment spaces to upgrade your characters, so you give them new abilities and new movements as you get more powerful. You also have the opportunity to recruit workers, which are cards that will give you ongoing abilities and these kinds of things. So all these aspects of like the encampment, the upgrading your characters, recruiting cards as workers that will give you ongoing abilities, all that stuff sounds really cool and super fascinating, but it all drives a game that I'm just not interested in. Now, Lavon Rising, the expansion, what it adds to this is a whole story-based campaign. There was a campaign mode in the original game, but Lavon Rising really beefs that up and gives a whole slew of narrative for you to sink your teeth into and explore and discover. And again, the outside of the board is what I would be going to the table for, but the main core of the game isn't something that's appealing to me. But what about you? Are you into these grid-based tactical skirmish games? Is that something you enjoy in your games? Have you ever played HeroClix? Let me know down below. Is that a game that you were huge on back in the day and that you got a lot of enjoyment on? Or did you kind of sour on it like me? Let me know down below. Coming in at number 2 on the hotness is Oath. I've talked about this in a previous video, but now Shut Up and Sit Down has done their review of Oath, and people are getting their hands on it and playing it more. So I heard about it recently on the Board Game Barrage podcast as well. So people are starting to talk about Oath, and so I thought I would revisit it. So basically, Oath is a war game of sorts, sort of a social experiment veiled in a war game is kind of what Oath is. So basically, every player has their own asymmetrical win condition that they need to fulfill in order to win the game. And the game starts off sort of lopsided, where you have one character who has kind of all of their war bands all over the territories on this map, and so they are in control. And basically, they need to maintain control throughout 8 rounds of the game. And then the other players, they're trying to usurp power, and they'll draw vision cards, which will give them specific win conditions to fulfill. So that's basically the gist, but that's a very slim gist to this game because there's so much going on. What is kind of drawing me back into the idea of giving Oath a shot is just the immersion and the experience that it promises, or oaths, to you. There's all of these different stories and things that emerge out of the narrative, and even moments where 2 players are right on the cusp of their victory conditions. And so then the other players have to kind of team up and make sure that they don't fulfill their conditions and then try and sneak in their own win condition at the same time. And so all these really exciting micro and macro stories emerge, and not from reading a card or reading from a book, but the game just produces stories. And that's my favorite kind of storytelling in board games, when the story just comes from the game mechanics and that particular playthrough. What I'm worried about, and what Shut Up and Sit Down kind of confirmed, is that this has a real propensity to leave people out. Like, what if you're at the table and you're playing, but you're not in on the exciting aspects of the game. You're not involved in that major conflict happening in the top right corner of the board, or you're not intimately involved in securing your win condition or wresting it away from another player. Like, what if you're just on the outs, just the way that the cards kind of came into your hand, or the way that you made a couple decisions in the wrong way? What if you're just kind of not in the fray? That could be really kind of demoralizing and discouraging. I just think that that is a major risk in this game, is if you're in it, you're having the best time of your life, and if you're not in it, well, you're not. So that's something that concerns me about Oath, but you know what? I think this is gonna be worth giving a shot. The next game I want to talk about has been around for a while. There's games that are on the Board Game Geek hotness that just stay there. They are just permanent fixtures on the hotness, and this is one of them, and this is Wingspan. And I want to just give it a little bit of attention and love today because it is a game worth talking about. But here's the thing about Wingspan for me. It is the best game that I never want to play. There is something really subtle about Wingspan. When you're playing this game, the experience for me is so understated. The theme is so unassuming, just you're collecting birds into your sanctuary and you're placing them out in their different natural habitats, and everything is just so meek and mild that I only notice that this game is thrilling and brilliant when I'm playing the game. When I see the game on my shelf, I think, oh, that's that nice bird game. And I just kind of gloss over it again. One thing that I love about Wingspan is this mechanism where as you play cards onto your tableau, there's 3 areas or habitats where you can play birds onto, and they correspond to kind of the basic actions of the game. And as you play cards in these different habitats, they increase the effectiveness of those actions for you. And again, it's so subtle, but it's really brilliant, where you have this nice little puzzle of like, where do I actually want to focus? On top of the actual abilities on the birds that you're playing into these areas. And so you're really trying to combo and leverage the card abilities with the main actions abilities, with the increased effectiveness of those actions, and you're trying to really make those all work together. And so it is brilliant, and it is an excellent puzzle, and it is a really, really good game. But again, I just don't notice how good this game is until I am in the thick of it. And then afterwards, I forget how good this game is. So I just wanted to talk about Wingspan and why I think it is the best game that I never want to play. And I want to know from you, do you agree with me? Let me know down below. Is Wingspan a game that you are drawn to? Or is it just a game like me where like you realize how awesome it is while you're playing it, but you kind of pass it over fairly often because of its sort of unassuming theme and quiet nature? Let me know down below. Another always on the hotness list is Lost Ruins of Arnac. But this also has some reason to be on the forefront of our minds because this past week we heard about the release of Expedition Leaders, which is going to be the new expansion to Lost Ruins of Arnac, coming to us at Ascent, so at the end of the year. So we'll probably be seeing this around November, December sometime. And so I made a video of this, so you can check that out, all about Expedition Leaders and what I think of it and questions for you about that game. But what I wanted to talk about Lost Ruins of Arnac again, because I've talked about it on the show before, but I wanted to give it another spotlight because Expedition Leaders, one of the things that it's going to bring to the table are new research tracks for you to add to the game board. And what's really interesting to me is that there's been some discussion over the year with people playing Lost Ruins of Arnac and complaining that the research track is kind of an overpowered strategy in the game. That if you want to win the game, you just need to focus your energies on the research track. People complain that if they go out to different sites and they come up against guardians and fight guardians and get points that way, that there's really kind of no competition between that and focusing on the research track. And the whole idea of Expedition Leaders bringing new research tracks onto the game seems like they might be trying to address that issue directly. And so I want to talk about that a little bit because from my experience of playing Lost Ruins of Arnac, I do not think that the research track is overpowered. My experience of Lost Ruins of Arnac is that there are all these different aspects, but what I've found is that you need each and every aspect of the game in order to help you with your core strategy. So you pick a core strategy when you set out to play Lost Ruins of Arnac, and then you need some additional resources. So you look at the research track and you say, well, if I go up this spot on the research track, then I can get that thing that I need to then go over here and defeat this guardian, or whatever the case may be, right? Because it's a really kind of resource management heavy game, there's always a need to kind of shift the resources that you have around. And the best way to do that is to focus on a different aspect of the game. So you might think, okay, I need to get some cards here because they're going to get me the resources that I need to move up the research track. The game does a really good job of making you rely on the different aspects of the game in order to accomplish your goals. But you are always going to want to focus in one area more so than the other, and from my experiences, you can be successful regardless of what you do. If you focus on the research track as your core strategy, you're going to do well. If you focus on fighting guardians as your core strategy, you are still going to do well, but you're always going to have to do a little bit of the other stuff in order to come out on top. You can't just focus on one thing and that's it. You always have to have a kind of foundation of the mix and then kind of excel in one area. So that's my take on Lost Ruins of Arnac and the research track. I don't think that's overpowered. I think you can do well fighting guardians and doing some research track and vice versa. But let me know down below what you think. Is the research track overpowered? Are you excited to see new research tracks in this Expedition Leaders expansion? Let me know down below. The last game I want to talk about today is Coalitions. This is currently on Kickstarter with 9 days left to go. And this is your classic negotiation, alliances, backstabbing, military hordes on a map game. This, you know, evokes thoughts of Risk and Axis and Allies and those classic games that you might have played when you were in high school into the wee hours of the night. The thing that really draws my attention to the game is kind of the core action selection mechanic. So basically there's a rondel and it has all of the different potential players or nations that you'll play as in the center of this rondel. And then there's the actions that you can do on a given turn on the outside, and each turn, the wheel turns. That's the action that you're going to do on your turn. So it looks like you're kind of slated in to do a particular action as the wheel goes by, and when the wheel does a full rotation, then the game kind of pauses and you have kind of 6 minutes or something, there's a timer, to make your alliances, to break coalitions, to stab people in the back, to do all these things, to kind of rearrange the alliances and the negotiations that you've made so far. The other thing that kind of makes me wonder about Coalitions is just with Oath in the kind of zeitgeist of the board game world right now, is something like Coalitions going to find a space? Oath is going to be a lifestyle game for a lot of people, and I think it's going to distract people from other games of that ilk. So when we're talking about negotiations and military strategy and kind of the immersion it brings to the table and the uniqueness it brings to the table, and especially its unique art style. And I think that Coalitions, while looking cool, it's fairly standard and it's fairly familiar. And so it's not going to have the edge in terms of catching people's eye. And so again, I just think that it's an interesting time for Coalitions to come onto the scene, because I think Oath is kind of stealing the thunder right now in that kind of area of game. Not that there's not tons of differences between them, but that's my concern and wonder. So there we have it, party people. Those are 5 trending games on Board Game Geek. I hope you found something today that interested you. I do this hotness video once a week, so subscribe to the channel for that. I also do top 5 board game lists and videos about buying board games and how to buy board games and where to buy board games and what to think about while you're buying board games, those kinds of things. So that's what I do here on the channel. If you're interested in those things, again, please subscribe. And until next time, party people, have the best day.